All right, so you brought some interesting stuff about 23andMe. We've got their Wikipedia page, some info on personal genomics in general, and this NPR article. And wow, this NPR article, it really makes you wonder about the future of this company. Seems like we're going to dive a little deeper than just your family tree today.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're interested in this whole world of consumer DNA testing, it seems. Like what it can do, where it can go wrong, and what it all means for you. Especially with this company's future, like up in the air right now.
Yeah, and speaking of that NPR article, they don't really hold back. 23andMe, one point valued at $6 billion with a B dollars, has had its stock drop by 99%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 99%. That's got to sting. And there's talk of a potential collapse, which is crazy.
It is really strange. You've got millions of users, a gold mine of genetic data, and yet it seems like they might be, going down.
The article kind of points to their business model as the problem, the idea that people buy a kit, they get the results, and then that's it. That's the end. Like they talked to this traveling nurse, Chanity Wiles. She found out she's almost 40% Nigerian, which is really cool. Love that insight. But she hasn't really felt the need to engage with 23andMe since then.
Which I totally get. Your DNA is not changing, so once you get your ancestry, your health risks all laid out, why keep paying?
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess thinking about that before you send in your sample is kind of key. Like, do you just want the one-time ancestry reveal, or are you hoping for something more? Because that ongoing value is what 23andMe might be missing.
Yeah, that's kind of the billion-dollar question. Is it about keeping users, hooked like a subscription? Or is the real prize the data itself? Data that could be used for research, for, developing new drugs, maybe even sold, which gets into a whole other can of worms about, what happens to your information. But before we get to all that, let's rewind a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to the beginning because not everybody's down with the nitty-gritty science here. So how do we get from spitting in a tube to these really detailed reports about our past and our, potential future health? I mean, it feels kind of magical, but I know it's going to be all about the DNA, right?
Yeah, no magic here. Just some pretty amazing science, though. It's basically about analyzing these tiny variations in your DNA sequence.
Yeah.
Think of them like little genetic typos that we all have. And what we do is compare your typos to millions of others. And those patterns can reveal some incredible things about, your ancestry, even your health.
So like my own unique combo of typos is how they pinpoint where my ancestors were hanging out centuries ago.
Exactly, yeah. 23andMe and other companies like them have these massive databases, DNA from millions of people, paired with information on their heritage. And then these complex algorithms, they kind of do the heavy lifting, comparing your DNA, finding the closest matches, and then giving you those ancestry estimates.
Okay, that makes sense. But this Wikipedia article also mentioned full genome sequencing, not just looking at these little specific spots.
Right.
Is that like the deluxe version of DNA analysis?
You could say that, yeah. Yeah, it's like the difference between checking a few key pages of a book versus reading the whole thing, cover to cover.
Okay.
So S&P analysis, which is looking at those typos, gives you a snapshot.
Right.
Full genome sequencing maps out your entire DNA sequence. It's a way more complete picture. And what's really incredible is how much cheaper it's become.
Yeah, the article said it went from $14 million per genome in 2006 to under $1,500 by 2015.
Wow.
That is a price drop.
That's amazing.
I can get behind that.
It's truly remarkable. This tech is becoming more accessible by the day. But with that accessibility comes a whole new set of questions, especially when we're talking about your health information.
Right.
And that's where things get even more interesting.
Yeah, because that's where the FDA stepped in, right?
Exactly.
I read that 23andMe used to offer a lot more health reports, but the FDA was not thrilled. What were they worried about? I mean, it's my DNA. Shouldn't I get to know, everything?
Well, it's not quite as simple as that, unfortunately. You see, interpreting genetic risk is incredibly complex.
Okay.
And the FDA was concerned that 23andMe might be oversimplifying things. Just because you have a gene variant that's common in folks with, say, a certain condition, doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get it.
So even if I have the gene for Alzheimer's, it doesn't mean I'm doomed to develop it down the line.
Not at all. And that's a key thing to remember, especially if you're thinking about doing one of these tests. Finding a connection, like a genetic variant showing up more in people with a certain disease, isn't the same as saying it causes that disease. Your genes are only one piece of a very, very complex puzzle.
So it's not like a crystal ball. It's more like a really, really detailed weather forecast.
Right.
It gives you the odds, but no, guarantees, right?
I like that analogy, yeah. And that's exactly why the FDA got involved. They were worried people might be making major life choices based on these genetic risk assessments without really fully grasping those nuances or maybe without even talking to their doctor first. And we also got to remember the accuracy of these tests. It's not perfect. There's always a chance for errors, misinterpretations. We're talking about your health here. It's serious stuff.
Which brings up a whole other layer of complexity here, which is the data itself.
Right.
This NPR article said something like 80% of 23andMe users agree to let their data be used for research. And they even have this partnership with GlaxoSmithKline, the big pharma company, to use it to develop new drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of trust.
Right.
We're putting a lot of trust in one company.
You're hitting on a really critical point here. We're talking about the privacy and informed consent of millions and millions of people. It's an incredibly valuable data set for research. There's no doubt about that. But it also brings up these really, really serious ethical questions.
Right, we're handing over this treasure trove of genetic information, but who is controlling who gets to see it?
Right.
What are they allowed to do with it? What happens if things go sideways with a company like 23andMe? It's a little unnerving to think about.
Totally understandable to feel that way. And the NPR piece does touch on those very concerns. Unlike your health records, which are protected under HIPAA, this kind of genetic data, it doesn't have the same level of protection. And state laws are all over the place. Plus, truly anonymizing genetic information, it's incredibly difficult. It's almost like, trying to scrub your fingerprints off of a glass of water.
Okay, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it also makes you wonder, what happens to all that data if 23andMe really does go belly up? Does it get sold off? Could law enforcement get their hands on it? These are the kinds of things that keep me up at night.
It's a valid concern. And this is where I think the Golden State Killer case, which was mentioned in the Wikipedia article, really shines a light on the potential implications. It's a chilling example of how genetic data can be used in ways, honestly, that people never even anticipated.
Yeah. For those of us who, haven't seen all the documentaries, what exactly happened with that case, and how does it tie back to all of this?
Well, investigators were able to use DNA from crime scenes to find relatives of the killer through a genealogy website. And this ultimately led them to Joseph James D'Angelo, who turned out to be the Golden State Killer. They had been searching for this guy for decades.
Wow. So it wasn't 23andMe directly, but a similar company that lets you upload your DNA to connect with relatives.
Exactly. And the crucial difference here is that it was an open source database, meaning law enforcement could access it. Now, to be fair, 23andMe says they'd never willingly hand over customer data to law enforcement without a court order. They even have this whole transparency report that says they've received 15 requests since 2015, but have fought them all.
Which sounds, it sounds reassuring on paper, but part of me is is that just corporate talk to keep people from freaking out? Especially now, given their financial troubles.
Yeah. You're right to be skeptical, and I think that's what makes their current situation even more concerning. What happens if they do go bankrupt? Their assets, which likely include this massive database of genetic information, could be up for grabs, and it's unclear what legal grounds they would even have to, prevent that data from being sold.
So even if I opt out of the research or delete my account, my data could still end up somewhere else down the line. That makes you think twice about hitting that I agree button.
It certainly highlights just how quickly the landscape of data privacy and security is evolving. Technology moves fast, often faster than the law. And so we have these incredible tools, but the rules about how that information is collected, stored, shared are constantly playing catch up.
You mentioned earlier the FDA, hitting the brakes on 23andMe's health reports.
Yeah.
What's the current situation now? Can they offer any health-related info?
They can, but it's much more limited than it used to be. After years of going back and forth with the FDA, 23andMe finally got approval in 2015 to offer carrier status reports for certain genetic conditions.
Carrier status?
Yeah.
So that's telling me if I might pass on a gene to my kids, even if I don't have any symptoms myself.
Exactly. Then in 2017, they got the okay to provide genetic risk reports for a few specific conditions, like Parkinson's disease and late-onset Alzheimer's disease.
Those are some heavy hitters. I can imagine getting that kind of info, even if it's just a potential risk, would be really kind of emotionally tough.
Absolutely. And that's one of the arguments against making this information so readily available. Finding out about your ancestry, that's one thing. But receiving information about your potential risk for a serious disease, it can be life-altering. And not always in a good way, right? It could lead to anxiety, unnecessary testing, even strained family relationships. It's a lot to grapple with.
It's like opening Pandora's box. Once you know, you can't unknow.
Precisely, and that's why the ethical considerations surrounding personal genomics are just so crucial. There's this constant tension between the potential benefits of this technology and the potential for harm.
And speaking of potential harm, the NPR article mentioned a data breach 23andMe had last year affecting nearly 7 million accounts.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence in their security measures, does it?
It's definitely a red flag. They claimed it was a credential stuffing incident, which is basically where hackers use stolen login info from other data breaches to access accounts.
Right.
But it does make you question their data security protocols for sure.
So not only is there this risk of the company potentially being forced to sell data if they go under, but there's also just the risk of hackers getting their hands on this really sensitive information. Makes you wonder, are the potential insights that you might get from one of these tests, are they even worth the potential risks to your privacy? It's a lot to weigh. It really does make you think, On the one hand, who wouldn't want to unlock these secrets that are buried in their DNA, right? But then on the other hand, it feels like, are you opening a door that you can't close? Once you know, you know.
That's a great way to put it. It's uncharted territory, not just for you as an individual, but for society as a whole, right? We're all trying to figure out where the ethical lines are with this kind of information, how to protect your privacy, and just how do we balance the good with the potential harm.
Yeah, it feels like we're at a crossroads. Like personal genomics is super popular right now, but as we're seeing with 23andMe, the future of these companies and the safety of our data they're big question marks.
They are, and that's why it's so important to be informed. Before you even think about spitting in that tube, you need to really understand the science behind these tests, what genetic risk information really tells you, and then that whole tangled web of data privacy that we talked about.
It's true. Knowledge is power, right? And in this case, it's not just knowing about your own DNA. It's knowing how this technology could impact, all of us, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a conversation that we all need to be having. What limits do we want to set on this kind of information? How do we balance those potential benefits with the potential risks? These aren't easy questions, but they're questions we can't just ignore.
Well said. And hopefully this deep dive has given you, the listener, a solid starting point to maybe explore these questions further.
Definitely. We've covered a lot of ground, the science behind it all, those tiny genetic variations that can tell such a big story, and of course the ethical and legal minefield of genetic data privacy. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, and it's only getting more important to stay informed as this technology is changing so rapidly.
Exactly. Yeah. So as you're considering whether personal genomics is right for you, just remember, your DNA, it is powerful information. Understanding it can be incredibly illuminating, but go in with your eyes wide open. Know those risks as well as the rewards.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a brave new world out there. Be informed, ask questions, and never underestimate the power of your own, genetic story.